Hi everyone, in this video I want to do a review of the prophecy in the book of Daniel and explain why this prophecy is all about sevens and why I believe this prophecy is pointing to the Hebrew year 5777. But I also want to explain why this is the beginning of the Jubilee year as of May 24th, when Israel celebrated Jerusalem Day just a couple of days ago. On the 24th, as you can see here, thousands marched in Jerusalem for the Jubilee. And I want to explain why I believe this is the beginning of the Jubilee year and not the end of the Jubilee year, because it's a little confusing when you think of it as the 50th anniversary or as a 50th birthday since the birth of Jerusalem. If you think of 1967 as being the year of birth, and then you add 50 years, that takes you to 2017, but that would make this year, beginning in 2017, be the 51st year. So I was a little confused about that, and so I want to explain how that works. And I think it's easier to go back to 1917 to show the pattern of how this is supposed to work. So if 1917 was the last Jubilee before 1967, you would then start the count again from 1918, because 1917 can't be the Jubilee year and also the first year of the next cycle. So you have to start the cycle again with 1918, and then you add 49 years, which takes you to 1967. And then again, this would be the Jubilee year, so you can't start the cycle again with the Jubilee year because it's supposed to be hallowed. There's not supposed to be any planting or working in that year. The land is supposed to lie fallow. And so you can use the same method when you're doing your calculations. You would let this year lie fallow. You don't use this year in your calculation. You go to the next year. So you would go to 1968, and then you add your 49 years, your 7 Sabbaths complete, your 7 sevens, and then that takes you to 2017, which is the beginning of the Jubilee year. So it's not the end of the year, it's the beginning of the year. Now I want to show you something interesting just as a side note, because I was thinking about the year 1917 and how that was the beginning of the formation of the Jewish state. That was the year of the Balfour Declaration, and it was also the year that the Ottoman Empire was defeated. And so this would be the beginning of the fig tree. It would have begun with the Balfour Declaration and the Battle of Jerusalem that occurred in 1917. And so I was thinking about the parable of the fig tree and how Jesus said, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." So I was thinking about the fact that 100 years should be a generation, and so I tried to pull up some information on that, and I came across this article. It's entitled, "What is a Generation in the Bible?" and explains over here how a generation is sometimes referred to as 40, 100, or 70 years. So any of these figures can refer to a generation. And this is a really interesting article. I'm not going to read it because it's a little long, but I'll put the link in the description box. It's really interesting if you want to read it. But I thought this part over here was particularly interesting. It's talking about the code in the Bible concerning the names in the Bible. For example, there's a code in the genealogy of Jesus, which is explained over here. That's what the Bible name code is. And it actually tells the story of Christ if you go through all of the names in the genealogy. And this is from God to Noah, and it gives here the meanings of all of these names. And if you read them consecutively, it tells the story, but it goes on through all 72 names. There are actually 72 names in the genealogy that this goes through. And you can see that right here. The meaning of all 72 names is in this genealogy over here. So you can read that and you can see that it tells the entire story of the Bible in the genealogy. And then this part right here is what I thought was really interesting. And also the fact that there are 72 names. That's an interesting number that I can talk more about, but I'll just briefly say that it's half of 144, and there was 72 elders that went up on Mount Sinai. There was 72 disciples that Jesus had sent out in pairs. So this is half of 144. And so this number is very significant, and I can explain more about that later. But I want to get back to the part that I thought was interesting, which is this part over here where the names actually branch off to the genealogy of Moses, but it's saying over here that this is clearly still part of the code, these 6 names over here, because it's perfect how they all fit together as a whole. And it says here, and they join at Levi, which means join. And so I'll just read this part right here. This is the first 3 that are also a part of the genealogy of Jesus. And so I'll just start from the top. It says, a glorious father, the father of a multitude, laughs as he outwits his enemy. A mighty prince sees God, then joins himself to an assembly, a glorious people whom he rescued, strangers in a strange land, captives delivered by God. And it says here that the name Levi actually means join. And so I just thought that was interesting considering what we've been talking about recently, and it explains over here why this part is important. It says the code reads well without including these 6 names. Nevertheless, it is evident that they should be included. This is due to their remarkable compatibility and as a prophecy, and because of the highly suggestive name at the spot where the 2 genealogies join. Levi means joined. And then down here it says Levi means joined, a hint that the kingly and priestly lines would somehow be joined in Messiah at this very juncture. And I would submit that somehow would be through the DNA. And so I just wanted to share that because I thought this was really interesting, and I'll put a link to this article in the description box. But now I want to get back to the prophecy in the book of Daniel, and I want to explain why I believe this prophecy is all about the number 7, and why I believe it points to this year, which is the Hebrew year 5777. And another thing that I want to point out is the importance of this number over here, 27, which is the verse number where this prophecy culminates. And one of the things that I noticed some time ago is if you go back 50 years consecutively from this year over here, which is the current Jubilee year, if you subtract 50 years, you see that it alternates between the numbers 27 and 77. So if you keep going, you see how it continues to alternate between those two numbers. And it works out the same way if you go to 2017. You'll see that there's a pattern as well. If you subtract 50 years from that, you see that it alternates between 67 and 17. Now, what's interesting is that there's a couple of places where these numbers cross over, and one of those would be the year 27 AD, which would have been the year of the coming of Christ, the first coming, which was 483 years from the decree in 457 BC, which would have been the decree of Artaxerxes that's recorded in the book of Ezra. So over here you can see the number 7. It's in Ezra 7 where this decree is recorded, and it ends in year 7. It's the decree of 457 BC. And it was also in the 7th year of Artaxerxes. Now, what was recorded in Nehemiah chapter 2 was actually not a decree. All 3 decrees are recorded in the book of Ezra, and what's recorded in Nehemiah was a conversation about the wall. But this is important as well. As you can see here, there's a separate mention of the wall. It says over here, the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And so what I noticed some time ago, actually around Christmas, I had done a video about this, but what I noticed at that time is that this part of the prophecy, the 62 weeks, actually refers to the birth of Christ, because if you calculate 62 times 7, that comes out to 434 years, and it was actually in 434 BC that Nehemiah was governor. And as you can see, there's several sources that confirm that. You can see one here. It says Nehemiah was governor 434 to 433 BC. That was in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes. What happened is he was governor, and then he left and he became governor again. And then over here it talks about Artaxerxes' 32nd year being 434 BC. And it mentions Nehemiah over here. Over here it says 434 BC, Nehemiah went back to Persia. And as you can see, there's quite a few sources. This one says written by Nehemiah in 446 BC to 434 BC, this part of the scripture. So it was during the year 434 BC that Nehemiah was governor. And so when you go to 434 BC and you add 434 years, that takes you to year 1. And the only reason it's year 1 is because there was no year 0. They skipped over year 0. That's why when you convert from BC to AD, you have to add 1, because when they changed the calendars, they didn't account for 0 on the timeline. And so you always have to add 1. So that's why it's showing year 1 instead of year 0. But this would refer to the birth of Christ. So these two numbers added together, the 62 and the 7, which is 69, which comes out to 483 years, that refers to the coming of the Messiah when Jesus began his ministry in 27 AD. But the 62 weeks refers to the birth of Christ, to his coming at the time that he was born. And I'm about out of time, so I'll have to continue in the next video. Thank you.